It's always great to be with Wingmen. Today, I was talking to Chad outside, and he was asking me how things are going, and I said, I've never felt more optimistic about what's about to happen in my life. And I've been doing this 29 and a half years, and I've never been more optimistic. And so, but sort of the title for, or the theme of what I'm about to say is really a window of opportunity. It's an opportunity that I've never seen, and I think it's going to happen, but it still is a window of opportunity. We've got to do our part. And so I want to start with some basics. I know most people in here know what First Liberty is. We're the largest legal organization in the country that all we do, nonprofit, that all we do is religious freedom. And so I thought the best way to start is show you one of our new cases. So this is one of our new cases.
Everybody in Walt Hill, Nebraska is talking about what's happening at Light of the World Gospel Ministries.
In the course of a week, we could have up to 200 people going through this building. We have 40 children that will come here every Wednesday night. We have between 100 and 130 coming every Sunday.
All that in a town of just over 700 people. Paul Malcolmson is the church's pastor. Yes, he's from Ireland. We'll get to that. The diverse congregation packs all those people into this tiny space. But outside, you'll find broken glass, boarded up storefronts, forgotten buildings. This one collapsed several months ago, and no one bothered to clean it up.
Basically, Walt Hill is known for what it doesn't have, not for what it does have.
Paul and his family moved here from Ireland more than a decade ago, all because of Pat Phillips.
I heard a testimony by a lady from the Omaha Indian Reservation. She outlined the challenges of living on a reservation.
I didn't know I would be speaking to 2,000 ministers and their wives.
She made one statement that rocked me, which was, "No one will serve my people."
My people haven't heard.
I couldn't get that phrase out of my heart for 3 months.
He heard the call, and that's when he came over.
When we moved to the reservation, we didn't have a church, we didn't have a congregation, we didn't even have financial support. The only thing that we had was God, a vision, and a lot of love.
That was then. Today, they have a very different, very pressing problem. The growing congregation saved up their money and bought most of the vacant buildings and an empty lot across the street to build a new home.
You can see this ain't even worth fixing. You'd be going from head to toe to fix it, you know.
They want to serve their community in very practical ways.
When we build this building, we hope to have obviously a main sanctuary, but attached to the sanctuary we'd like to have businesses like a Goodwill, a bookshop, a cafeteria, a laundromat. What we're trying to do is breathe life into this community, both spiritually and economically, and we believe this town can be turned around and be a vibrant community, and we look forward to that happening.
But village officials are standing in the way of the congregation.
That we have provided the board with everything that is required in their ordinances, but yet many times we can't get approval, or we just plain cannot get a vote.
I believe we are experiencing blatant religious discrimination. There's people in this town that do not want us in town.
If you looked outside, you see the bricks. That one is split like that, like it's ready to fall.
We have worked very closely with First Liberty, and that has been invaluable to us in regard to moving forward. We have avoided a lot of icebergs, and I honestly don't know how we would have got to today without the help of First Liberty.
Well, government officials are targeting this small multi-ethnic congregation and trying to prevent it from using its property to serve the needs of this diverse community. The First Amendment and the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act protect the right of churches to operate free from unreasonable and intrusive government interference. At First Liberty, we are committed to ensuring that this church can freely serve the needs of its community.
Paul says the ultimate goal is to win together.
We're hoping that the village will work with us. Our heart is not to fight the politicians. Our heart is to work with the politicians and with them see this community turned around. Some people might wonder, why would we want to live in this town? But there's nowhere else in the world that I would want to live but in Walt Hill, Nebraska. This is where God wants us, and this is where God needs us.
Stuart Shepard, Liberty Watch.
Example of one of our newest cases. I mean, when I started doing this almost 30 years ago, you could never convince me that we would have to represent churches against our government, but we have to represent churches all over the country. Most of you know my story. Back when I was in high school, I knew my gifts were in analytical thinking and speaking, and I thought I either need to be a pastor or a lawyer. And people were like, well, that's like a God or Satan choice to be a pastor or a lawyer. And, my youth pastor said to me, you're called to be a minister. It's a great calling. But I will say this, there are a lot of Christian pastors, but boy, we sure could use some more Christian lawyers. And, as I got out of law school and clerked and was about to have my job, I was like, I just don't feel called to regular law. And I remember thinking, what do you want to do? And I just said, well, I'd like to use my legal skills because I feel like God's shown me I should do that, but I want to help pastors and churches and religious freedoms and our founding principles, and I'd even like to go to seminary. And I laughed, there's no job like that. I mean, I couldn't have found that job. It didn't exist. And about 2 weeks later, two guys I'd never met called me out of the blue, said, will you come to lunch? And they were partners in major law firms, and they said, we started doing religious freedom work, just donating our time. We're getting so many calls, it's hurting our ability to make a living. And so we just heard about you, and we were wondering, would you be willing to come on and do legal cases and help pastors, churches, religious freedoms, and our founding principles? And you can even go to seminary part-time. And, that was 29 years and 4 months ago. And now, First Liberty is the largest legal organization in the country. All we do is religious freedom. So God, I say that to encourage everybody in here. If you have certain gifts and things, and maybe there's not an avenue that you see directly yet, just start walking towards where God has your gifts. He might create something new. You might be the first person to do something. God's always got a great plan, and He didn't make us like He made us by accident, right? We all have to work out of our weaknesses sometimes, but we're supposed to really live out of our gifts, and we need to do that. And so I wanted to start, and this is something I bet most of you have seen this video because I think I've shown it here before, but I just think it's a great. Why are we involved in this, right? Now, as Christians, we immediately know, well, we've got to be able to share the gospel, right? But this goes much broader than that, and I just want to make sure we remember why this is so important, why religious freedom is our first freedom, and why it's key. And so I want to start with a testimony from a guy who doesn't even know the Lord, but he's a big supporter of First Liberty. So we'll start with that.
If somebody told us that we were going to be crawling through barbed wire fences and escaping and moving across the ocean to America, everybody would have said, that's absolutely silly. That'll never happen. If they'd caught, let's say, a politician who opposed them, they put him on trial, but the evidence might have been presented, but the outcome was a foregone conclusion. So they had total control of you. That's how a dictatorship is run. My father was, first of all, very patriotic, had strong beliefs in democracy. The people that he helped were, if not friends, very good acquaintances. He knew they were going to get killed. So when he got arrested, my mother got arrested, and my brother, who was 8 years older, got arrested. So my whole family, except me, were in jail. Then my father would have been executed, but my mother managed to bribe the judge. He got sent to concentration camp in lieu of that, where he was, beaten, not fed. I mean, basically tortured. As soon as he escaped, his name was on the radio all the time, and as one of the most wanted people. There was a Secret Service sitting in our front hallway all the time. As you study history, one needs to be vigilant all the time. because you cannot take anything for granted. When you start losing freedoms, it is more than likely that it'll keep on chipping away. The opportunities we have, the ability to express yourself and do whatever you want to do and be able to achieve things without being blocked are unparalleled. The political correctness is ridiculous. I mean, it's just going too far. Defending the ability to have crosses or Christmas decorations just is getting to a point of absurdity. When I think about what was happening in Czechoslovakia at that time, there are parallels, because I think anytime you start taking away people's freedom, it just goes on. And you must take guard in the early stages as opposed to wait and let it all collapse when it's too late. Nobody expected communism in Czechoslovakia when it happened. It happened.
I met Peter after one of one of my talks, and he came up and said, "Look, I'm not a person who believes like you do, but I saw this happen in my country. They took down the religious symbols, and within months, we all lost our political freedoms." And he said, "So, I'm going to be supporting you now on." He handed me a check for $5,000 and said, "I'm going to be supporting you." He said, every few months, he sends in a check, and he doesn't even know the Lord. He just knows that if you lose your religious freedom, you'll lose all your freedoms. And there's a reason for that. I mean, if you're going to have some sort of communist or socialist type of government, you cannot have intermediary institutions between the individual and the state. So like the church, the rights of parents over their children, that stuff has to be destroyed. And so the best way I usually describe this is the one thing that totalitarianism cannot allow are citizens who hold an allegiance to one higher than the government. So when these people that will not bow a knee to the government, they bow a knee to the Lord, that has to be eradicated. And that's the first flashpoint. And if you lose that, you lose everything. And so, so I just throw that out because, this is even broader than just our right to share the gospel. This is about whether we have a free country. And again, I've told you this before, but I've never seen anything like in the last, 10 years or so, the levels of attacks we're seeing are just never happened in our country. I mean, I bring that book and it gets bigger every year of the increased numbers of attacks. And so we had 420 legal matters over the last year. So I obviously can't go through all those, but I thought I'm going to do updates on some of the key ones real quick with you and tell you what's going on. Let me start with the Klein case. Aaron and Melissa Klein, the bakers in Oregon, and she did that really. She did the wedding cakes all custom made, so and did it really scripturally. She wanted to really connect to that couple and do something that biblically really connected with them. And they had two women come in and say, "Hey, we'd like to buy baked goods from you." And they said, "Oh," they knew this was a lesbian couple, and they were like, "Oh, great, we're happy to sell you things." And then eventually came in and said, we want you to do a custom gay wedding cake for us." And they said, "Oh, we're really sorry, we can't do that because of our faith and what we believe about marriage. We're happy to send you somewhere else that'll do a great job." And next thing they knew, the state of Oregon was coming after them, and they were fined $135,000. Their business has now been bankrupted. They were ordered not to speak publicly their beliefs about marriage. That's not a violation of the First Amendment, right? And now they're at the Supreme Court. We should know in about 2 months whether the court is going to take the case or not. The final briefs will be done by then, but so probably February or so we'll start to hear about Aaron and Melissa Klein's case. But this case is not just about wedding vendors or whatever else. This is about whether the government can tell you you can't run your business according to your faith. I mean, this is a very broad issue here that's going to affect everybody in the country of faith who's involved in their workplace. Another case I'll get to here in a second is a case we have in Dallas. You think this is stuff that happens in Germany or somewhere else, right? This is our case in Dallas. This is we have cases all over the country right now. We're representing Jewish synagogues who are being attacked. We just filed one last week in New York where they've created zoning regulations to try to make it to where the Jewish synagogues cannot meet. In fact, this town, the history of this town, Airmont, New York, it was specifically created, came into existence to get rid of the Orthodox Jews. That's its history. The Department of Justice had to bring lawsuits 20 years ago. Well, they're still doing that. But this is in Dallas. They're trying to tell this synagogue that they can't meet. Well, why? Well, they said the final sticking point was they didn't have enough parking spaces. Okay, they're Orthodox Jews. They can't drive to the synagogue. Okay? So this tells you the mindset we're dealing with here. And this is what they did to the rabbi's car. So again, not something in other countries. This is something, we've got cases in Los Angeles, in Dallas, in New York, all over the country, defending the right of a Jewish synagogue to meet. Next case I'll mention are military cases. Chaplain Squires case. This guy is he was awarded the Bronze Star, got the Meritorious Service Award 5 different times. A credible guy, great chaplain. And if you understand how chaplaincy works, he's in the Army, the law actually, the regulations actually require you to be a member of an endorsing group. It's essentially your denomination. And you're required as a chaplain to follow the beliefs of that denomination, of that endorsing group, or they can take away your chaplaincy. Well, his is Southern Baptist. And so, as you might guess, Southern Baptist, they're told not to marry a man and a woman, or, a man and a man, or a woman and a woman, or to counsel towards marriage, same-sex type marriage. And he had two women come and say, hey, we'd like to be in your marriage counseling conference. And well, the regulations say if that happens to you, you're supposed to say, well, I can't do that because those are different from the beliefs of my endorsing group, but I'm happy to see if I can find another chaplain that doesn't have those beliefs that can take care of you. That's exactly what he did. Found another chaplain. You think everything would be fine. No, they filed a complaint, and he was investigated. And despite the fact that he met every regulation, followed everything exactly like he's supposed to, they said, nope, he's in violation because this is discrimination. We don't care what the regulations say. This is a violation of discrimination. And if that wasn't as bad enough, then they determined that was, quote, derelict of duty, meaning he could be court-martialed, okay? His career's over. His assistant, an African-American woman, they determined she was guilty too. Well, what do you mean she was guilty? What did she do? Well, they came to her first, and she said, oh, let me see if I can get you the chaplain. That's what she did. And she was about to start her college, which she had now earned because of her service and everything else, and they took her college away. So they were going to destroy this guy and his assistant. Good news is this case is now over, and we won, and he's chaplain, and everything's been reversed. But I just tell you this because this is the kind of stuff going on to people who are serving us. I can't even, because I know you're taping, I can't even say what the final decision maker said at the end of the case. Call off anyway, they didn't like the fact that we were bringing attention to what they were doing. And everything's been reversed now. But this is the kind of stuff. And the other one, which you're probably aware of, Oscar Rodriguez case. Update on that. I think most of you remember this, but Oscar is a guy who served 33 years and then afterwards came up with a speech that he gives during the flag folding ceremonies. And a lot of people want him to come do it because it's a really powerful speech, and it ends by saying, God bless our flag, God bless our troops, God bless America. And a guy said, hey, I'm at my private retirement ceremony, would you come and do that? And he said, I'd be honored to do that. And he did. And what he didn't know is the colonel who was in charge of that base had decided he didn't want anybody mentioning God on the base. So as he stood up, uniformed military grabbed this guy and threw him out of the room. Something I never thought I would see. Uniformed military grabbing a guy who's now a civilian, putting their hands on him because he's going to mention God. Well, we tried to get them to, correct this, whatever. They refused. And we're like, okay, we're going to light you up because, this violates the First Amendment, the Fourth Amendment, and, okay. And so it's now in federal district court in Washington, D.C., and our judge is one of the judges newer judges appointed by President Trump. He's not, seen as a liberal. He's seen as a guy who actually cares about the Constitution. And so we feel really good, and we feel like, great, if you want to fight, we're going to create some great precedent to make sure that this doesn't ever happen again. And if you haven't seen that, go online to firstliberty.org. We've got a video, and it's a retirement ceremony, so it was all being taped. So we've got it on tape of what happened. It's great evidence. So anyway, but that's the update on that. Other area I'll tell you about real quick is we're now having to do a bunch of cases defending seniors, citizens who in their living facilities. You're like, what? And I'm like, yeah. Well, the first case, we had this woman. They said, well, let me show you the sign. I mean, this is what they posted in her center. You can use the piano. People are like, oh, the lawyers made up the sign, right? It was like, no, we didn't make up the sign. This is what they were doing. They told these women, you can play the piano, but if you sing a gospel song or anything about Jesus, you're going to get in big trouble. It's like, you can't do that. And you think, well, that's crazy. I can't think of anything worse. Well, okay, well, let me go to the next case. Ken Hauge, retired minister, 80 years old. If you understand a lot of these senior living facilities, I mean, many of the people there, they can't go out and even go to church. I mean, they're just not able. And so what they do is they a guy like this is a former minister. They said, would you do a Bible study with us in the center? Oh, sure. There's a common room anybody can use. But he was told he can't use the common room if he's going to have a Bible study. And he said, okay, well, I'll just do it in my apartment. He got a letter saying he would be evicted if he held a Bible study in his apartment. So this is what's happening in our senior centers. That's a religious discrimination in housing. So we are now talking to HUD. I don't know if you know, Ben Carson's the head of HUD. He kind of likes religious freedom, so I feel pretty good about, the fact that he's going to follow the law. But this is a really important case because of how many seniors in all these living facilities all over the country it's going to impact. But stuff I never thought we'd have to fight. So I thought the quickest way I can give you a feel real quick for how unprecedented what we're seeing is right now is just to run through our Supreme Court stuff that we filed over the last year. So let me run through those real quick. First case is Coach Kennedy. I think everybody knows about Coach Kennedy. Went down for a 15, 20-second prayer on a knee after the football game, fired. Ninth Circuit said coaches are not allowed to pray in public, quote, if anyone can see them. That's the ruling. That is not the law in the United States, and so we're at the Supreme Court. I'll just say this. The way things work at the Supreme Court, they get about 8,000 requests. They take 80 cases. So most of the cases, they just say denied. Denied. They don't rule either way. They just deny and it's over. Okay? Coach Kennedy's came up in a pool of, hundreds of cases. They took 200 and something of them, said denied. And then they said, we're bumping it to the next conference. Okay? Came again, hundreds of cases, denied. Coach Kennedy's case, bumped to the next conference. That's now happened 7 times. Okay? So we don't know what's happening, but we know something's happening. So be in prayer. We could literally hear today, because this is the next conference today, when the justices will meet and they will vote. Or they'll say, whatever's going on, we're going to bump this to the next one. So be praying for this. But that's case 1. Case 2, Bladensburg. This is a Veterans Memorial that was put up almost 100 years ago by the American Legion and by mothers who lost their sons in World War I. And the American Humanists filed a lawsuit saying we got to tear down this Veterans Memorial because it's a cross. And during the oral argument, one of the Obama appellate judges on the panel asked, well, what if we just cut the arms off the cross? Won't that take care of the problem? That's literally the question he asked. So it didn't surprise us when the decision came down and they said, yep, after 100 years, this is now unconstitutional. And that's bad enough, but what this would mean for every Veterans Memorial in the country that has religious imagery, I mean, that's pretty extreme, right? But this Court of Appeals within its jurisdiction is Arlington National Cemetery. Okay? And the dissent that was written, but we went en banc. We said, these 3 judges, this is outrageous. We got to go to all 15 of the judges. And it was like 9-6. They still upheld this. But the dissents all wrote, this means you're going into Arlington and tearing down the crosses in Arlington. Okay? That's what everybody knows that's what this means. Good news is, about a month ago, the United States Supreme Court said, we're taking this case. Okay, so we'll be arguing this in the spring, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that, but it's a big, big deal. They don't take very many cases. This is going to set precedent for, decades. Second case. Third case, Marianne Sause. I don't have a lot of time, so I'm telling you, what I'm telling you now is true. This case was about whether the police are allowed to tell a woman she's not allowed to pray in her own home. Court of Appeals said that was not unconstitutional. Good news is, the last day of the term, last term, 9-0 ruling reversing the court below in her favor. Fourth case and fifth case, Rowan County, North Carolina, and Jackson County, Michigan, both about whether you can open up your meeting in a city council, not in city council, in the county commissions with prayer. We've done it since the founding, but ACLU brought a lawsuit and said, yeah, well, I know we've had chaplains and stuff, but the county commissioners themselves aren't allowed to open with prayer. And so one circuit said that's unconstitutional. The other circuit said, no, that's not unconstitutional. We've been doing that since the founding of the country. And then the last case is Livingston Christian School. This is a school that said, we want to exist in this church. They said, no, I'm sorry, you can't have your Christian school in this church. They said, okay, where in the city limits can we have the school? And they said, nowhere. There's nowhere in the city limits you're allowed to have your church under our zoning laws. And so the question is literally, can you have zoning laws that say you can't have a Christian school anywhere in the city limits? So I just want to go through that again real quick. These are the cases we had at the Supreme Court. I mean, are all coaches banned from praying in public if anybody can see them? Are we going to tear down all our veterans memorials or crosses or any sort of religious imagery that's been up for 100 years? Is it okay now for the police to tell a woman she can't pray in her own home? Are we going to tell county commissioners they can't open their meetings with prayer, even though we've done that since the founding of the country? And are we going to ban Christian schools from city limits? That just gives you a feel for the kind. That didn't used to be my list of what we were working on, right? So we're in a real battle. So it's, some of you get depressed if you just hear about these cases. The good news is we're winning these cases. We're winning, now it's been 18 years in a row, that we've won over 90% of our cases, okay? So we can win these cases that we fight. And most of you know our model, which is rather than do the normal thing of what a nonprofit legal organization does, which is raise money, use the money to hire attorneys, put them on staff, and then fly them around and do your cases. What we do is, there's these great attorneys all over the country. They're believers. And went to law school because they wanted to do what was right, stand for what was right and righteous and good. And 30 years later, they're at the best law firms in the country. They're some of the most powerful lawyers in the country. And they've done honorable work for their clients, but they've really not ever gotten to do a case for the kingdom. And so we come and we sit down with them. We say, look, if we give you everything you need, are you willing to give your time on one of these cases? And they're like, I've been waiting 35 years, sign me up. And we know what's going to happen. We give them that case. For the first time in their life, all their talent, and their gifts, and their training is lined up with, their passion for their faith and their country. And they've never felt that before. And so it's kind of unfair, but we know we now have them for the rest of their lives as one of our volunteer attorneys. And they give cover to the younger attorneys. They taste what it's like. And so we have the best lawyers at the best law firms in the world. Most of our teams you could never pay for. It would just be astronomically ridiculous to hire these teams. For Coach Kennedy, who's our lead counsel in the Coach Kennedy case? Paul Clement, former Solicitor General of the United States, #1 guy at the Supreme Court. If you're the NFL and you have an appeal going to the Supreme Court and you want to hire the best, who do you hire? They hired Paul Clement, okay? Well, what about Bladensburg? Well, we had a guy by the name of Noel Francisco. Unfortunately, we don't have him anymore. Why? Because he became the Solicitor General of the United States. So who do we replace him with? The #2 guy at the United States Supreme Court, Mike Carvin, who works at Jones Day, one of the biggest law firms in the world. So we couldn't do this if it wasn't for the body of Christ and people willing to give of their time. And we put these incredible teams together, right? And the result of that is, #1, for every $10,000 we spend, on average, we get $60,000 donated on the cases. So we're literally leveraging the money 6 to 1. But the other is the win-loss ratio. If you watch these nonprofits, you'll find if they're really good, they're maybe 50-50. Because they're fighting government and change and everything else, 50-50. Maybe they're great, they're 60-40. And our win rate now for, over 18 years in a row has been above 90% every year, win rate. So be encouraged. That's the body of Christ in action. That's people giving of themselves, using their talents that they've been given to affect a lot of other people in positive ways. So God's at work in incredible ways. Despite all these attacks, we're winning. If we're willing to stand up, we'll win. And we have been winning. I want to show you, because you don't see a lot of encouraging things. Let me show you the map. When we went we were a state group for years. When we went national, 5 years, almost 6 years ago, these were our first. Oh, you jumped too quick. These were our cases. You see, it was like, we want you to do. We're winning 96, 97% of our cases, and they're like, will you leave Texas and come do a case in our state? And we're like, well, we got to pray about this. Does the Lord want us to be not just a Texas group? And we immediately realized, yes, the need is great. Nobody's using this model that we're using. And so we need to do this all over the country. And so that was year one. Now you can see, here's where we are now. So what's great about that to me is the cases are increasing every year. And you always wonder, is this model scalable? Are we still going to win 90% of our cases? Can we do this if we're doing much larger numbers? The answer is yes. The way this essentially works is we hire every attorney we hire on staff, and the support staff around that attorney can free up about 20 of these national litigators to give their time. And so that's how the cases increase. So for about $200,000, we hire the attorney and the support staff percentages around that, and that frees up about $1.2 million of donated time. So it's just a multiplier that is happening as fast as we can go. So it's a lot of good news. Now, normally this would be the end of what I would talk about, but then we had this election thing happen, and we were planning how do we advance religious freedom under President Hillary Clinton, and then this Trump guy won, and we were like, okay, we've got to reevaluate what opportunities are there now under this administration, and we immediately saw, literally about 200 different opportunities to advance religious freedom, some of which for long term. There were 120 federal judicial seats waiting to be filled when he came into office. You talk about long-term impact, right? That's who our children and our grandchildren are going to go before. These are people that go in the court now that are on for 30 years, 40 years. And so I went to the board and I was like, look, we've got lots of opportunity to, in a short amount of time, affect long-term the kind of religious liberty decisions and the future of our country. And I said, but I got the same budget I had before this. And they said, well, how much more do we need to help vet judges and do all this other stuff that we can do? And it was about $2.3 million a year. And they said, well, let's see if God will bring the money in addition to our budget to do that. And within like a week, I had a guy come up to me and say, I voted for Trump, but the only reason I voted for him was because of judges. And he said, I don't want you to wait to start this process with judges until you get the money, because then you're going to be delayed. So just know $1 million is coming from me over the next 2 years. Start this process. And so my board was kind of convicted by that. And so one of them said, I'm doing 200,000, I'm doing 100,000, and pretty quickly we started going. And so it's amazing to see what God's been doing. The Supreme Court justices you see, we were heavily involved in. Brett Kavanaugh donated time with me on a religious liberty case almost 20 years ago. People don't do that when they're young attorneys unless they're committed to religious freedom. But all the lower court judges we're getting in, the type of people, these are people that would sit next to you in your pew in your church that, I'll give you an example. There's a guy, I won't even say who he was because I know it's on video, so they might go after him, after they hear this. But this is just typical. Top of his class from law school, goes to work for one of the biggest law firms in the country, decides, he's tired of just doing regular law, so he wants to do something that matters, so he goes to work for the Justice Department, putting away terrorists. Gets an award for putting away terrorists. Eric Holder comes in as the new Attorney General and pulls him off some of his terrorist work to work on LGBT issues. And he's like, that's not why I came here. So he left. Well, where'd he go? Well, he went to do some religious liberty work. And at 39 years old, the President Trump, picked him to be a federal judge for the rest of his life. Okay? This is a guy so committed to the Constitution, he would rather saw off his arm than to ever move away from it. And his faith is as solid as you'll ever find. And he will be on the court for probably 30, 40 years. This is who my great-grandkids will go before. That's a long-term impact. And that's just one. So let me show you 84. I think we have this chart. Yeah. That's how many we've gotten confirmed so far. There's 84. But let me show you what's about to happen. 155 seats we're in the process of filling right now. Okay? So what I want to say, I guess my summary of all this is I've never seen kind of what's happening on religious freedom. There are a lot of really dangerous things happening. The ship sort of turned. And two examples. We've got some great judges in, but we just sort of tipped the crest of the hill. And it's about to really happen. And we're going to see some incredible people going on the court that are going to make a long-term difference. That's what we're going to be working on heavily the next 2 years. And I could tell you story after story after story of who these people are. And you would think, man, this is great. I mean, you'd be so thrilled. But in addition to that, what's happening on that front and on all the other fronts is affecting our other part of what we're doing, which is the cases. Because there's now 5, well, I'll tell you this. For the first time since the 1920s, there are 5 justices on the Supreme Court who want to follow what the Constitution says. I mean, not an evolving, living Constitution that they kind of use as Play-Doh to make into what they want. Not that judicial philosophy. There are actually 5 people who say they're originalists, and that means whatever it says, that's what they're going with. What did the founders mean? What did they mean when they, I mean, that hasn't happened in all of our lifetimes. We've never had that. We do now. So let me give you an example. Bladensburg case. Everybody looks at this and sees Veterans Memorial case. Yes, it will affect Veterans Memorials. But there's a much bigger thing, I think, about to happen. That is, this is about the Establishment Clause. Okay? The Establishment Clause, have you ever heard all these terms about separation of church and state and all these wall of separation and all this stuff? It's not in the Constitution. Okay? Where did it come from? A bunch of liberal justices brought it in, created a new test out of this case called Lemon versus Kurtzman, the aptly named Lemon test. It's a horrible test. It's used to attack religious freedom. It kind of makes the Constitution hostile to religious expression, which is not what the founders ever wanted. And it's led to some horrible opinions. Well, for the first time, we now have 5 justices who don't care about what people made up. They want to know, what does the Constitution say? And so many, many people, many legal scholars think that they're going to use this case, the Bladensburg case, as the first opportunity to begin moving the law back on religious freedom to what our founders intended. Okay? That'll affect everything. So be praying about that case. I mean, we're writing the briefs right now, and we've never had to write a brief like this. We're having to write, since they need to throw out the old garbage that's been used in the past, that even the justices admitted was garbage. They need to move to something. What's the new approach? How do they approach this? We're having to lay that out. So be praying, but just know the opportunity, I think things are about to begin to change dramatically in a lot of these. I think the shackles on religious freedom are coming off, and the vibrancy is going to be there. Now, we still have to live that out, right? I mean, what good does it do if we give people religious freedom and nobody's using it? And that's part of why Wingmen exists, is to use that to affect lives forever. But I just want you to be encouraged. I've never been as encouraged as I am right now about what I think is about to happen if we're faithful. So be praying and get involved. Oh, by the way, if you're not, I know a lot of people are on the list. You get the info, you see the cases, you pray, you can share them with other people. If you're not, there's a card on every table, or cards. If you'll fill out the card and leave it with, where's Don? Don Spack. And if you don't know Don, you need to know Don. Don's here all the time. I'm out of the state all the time. So he always is filling people in on what's going on and kind of updating you. But leave that with me or Don, and we'll get you on the list, and so you'll be in the know, and hopefully you'll be like a Paul Revere for your own community, telling people what's going on, warning them, and really emboldening them with the freedoms that they have as we're winning these cases. Because if we have freedoms and nobody knows it, what good does it do? But if people know it, they live more boldly, and they're not as intimidated with what people will try to do to say, oh, well, you can't do that. You say, watch me. I'll tell one story on this. I spoke in the Air Force Academy a number of years ago, about 3 years ago. Chad had something to do with that. And they had breakout sessions. They could go to whatever they wanted. They came to my session. They were lining the walls. There was nowhere to see because of the persecution, the stuff that had been going on in there. And we talked about what their freedoms were, what the law really was, and laid it out for them. And there's some enemies in there attacking us and all that. That's fine. And I think it's about a week or two later, they have little whiteboards outside their doors, up and down, where they can write things. Go UT, or whatever they want to write, right? Well, one of them wrote Galatians 2:20 on their board, okay? And somebody complained, and the leadership came to this cadet and said, take that off. The next day, again, they had heard what we said. There was a picture in the newspaper. Every whiteboard up and down had verses, different verses. Everybody had a different verse. Because they knew they weren't going to be intimidated out of their constitutional freedoms. They knew their rights. And so we need to do that with other people and free them up. So we might be late. I want to do Q&A. I don't know how much time we have, but I'm happy to answer any questions or snide remarks you guys have. Yeah. It is changing. The Ninth Circuit, if you don't know, is considered the most liberal federal court of appeals in the country. It's out of San Francisco. It's also the biggest in the country. It really needs to be split in half. It's got 29 judges on the Ninth Circuit, whereas all the other ones have 15. And it's notoriously liberal. It is, number one, each of these judges that the president is nominating and that we are getting through on the Ninth Circuit are changing it one by one. We had one really bad situation. Unfortunately, Senator Tim Scott, on the last second, said he wasn't going to vote for somebody, so we lost one really good person that was going to be on there because of some bizarre conduct by a Republican senator. But besides that, we've gotten a number of good people on. As far as changing and splitting up the circuit, which is what they do, Congress can do that. They should do that, but it's really going to be hard to do that. I think the only chance would be maybe in a second term of a President Trump if you had numbers in the House and the Senate. But it really is, it's not right that there's all these western states that are being predominated by California. And so the representation is being skewed out there because the circuit has all these judges and it's double the size of all the rest. And so it's allowing California to kind of control all those other states as far as the rulings go. And it's the most reversed. I think last I saw, 80% of the cases that the Supreme Court has taken from the Ninth Circuit have been reversed, which is way beyond any other court. So it's really kind of an outlier. The Fourth Circuit is now competing with the Ninth Circuit. President Bush left a number of seats open, and Obama filled it and others. And so that's the circuit that ruled in the Bladensburg Veterans Memorial case. That's why we got such a bad ruling, even though almost any other circuit in the country, I think, would have ruled our way, but that one didn't. So there's a number of these circuits that are now in play of moving back from one direction to the other. And as these judges go on, that's what's happening. It just takes time to get the numbers and everything else. Yeah?
Do you have any concerns with what Brett Kavanaugh is doing during his confirmation, that people may not be willing to serve if they've got to go through that kind of public service scrutiny?
Yeah, the question is, do you have concerns because of what Brett Kavanaugh had to go through that we're going to lose good people from wanting to be? And yeah, definitely have that concern. Had that concern even before Brett Kavanaugh. It has already gotten ridiculous. I really think, we'll see, but number one, I think we're going to have another one within the next year. And I think the next one is going to be easier in some ways because there's going to be more numbers. The Republicans are going to have more numbers, so there's more of a cushion. But number two, I think it'll probably be a woman. I think it's going to be hard to say she sexually assaulted somebody. Nobody's going to buy that stuff. So I think that'll be better. But I think what's going to happen long term, and I really do believe this, is the court, if we get back to maybe now 6 justices who actually think their proper role is to interpret the Constitution and apply the words that are there instead of sort of making things up to fit the times, which is kind of what this other group does, the court's going to slowly become less relevant in everybody's life. Because they're going to say, you know what, this isn't in the Constitution, so this is up to you. And the more that happens, the less politicized the court becomes, the less those hearings become important, and the more we move away from that and to where the responsibility really lies, which is with us. So I think that's going to happen, but I think that tipping point that we just saw happen was really, really important, and that's why, we saw all hell unleashed. Because for the first time in our lives, we now have judges that don't want to be legislators, running the court. They actually want to say, you know what, no matter what I believe, what does the law say? What does the Constitution say? What's the original meaning of this? And they're going to, in humility, really step back and submit to whatever that is. And if it's a bad law, they're going to say, this is what it says. If you guys want to change it, you got to change it. And so I feel like we're moving that direction, and hopefully that'll cause better people to be able to put their name in the hat and battle again. But right now, you're right. I mean, anybody who goes into that process, it's pretty ugly. I don't know who's next, so over here. Well, on the abortion front, if people were to guess with the current court now what's going to happen on abortion, there's a number of big cases that are being appealed. There's opportunities, right, for the court to take this and deal with this issue. In my view, if you were to ask all of those justices, and which they never would tell you, what they believe, they would have to admit that Roe v. Wade is just made up. Okay, it's a bad decision. It's intellectually indefensible. Even liberals say that. It's a horrible opinion. But it's nowhere in the Constitution is there a right to an abortion, right? It's a legislative issue. But there's a lot of cases through the years sort of reaffirming it as precedent. So most people would guess that with the current 5 you've got, especially the Chief Justice and Kavanaugh. Kavanaugh is conservative in all ways. I mean, he's conservative in not wanting to, just kind of like Roberts, not wanting to change things quickly. So they would probably be more likely to move the right way 10%, 20% at a time, rather than just everything overnight. That's what people would guess. If you had 6, though, if you had one more, now the way it works is it takes 4 justices to take a case, and so they can kind of force the issue on the rest of them if you got 4. If you had one more who was really strong, you might have 4 that say, we're going the whole way. We're just going to take one of these big ones. And then it would force all 6 of them to vote, and I think it would be overturned. But I think it's going to take a while, I think, on that issue. I think it's going to move back in the right direction, which is toward what the Constitution. But people need to realize, even if you overrule Roe v. Wade, it doesn't mean you solve the issue. It just means it goes back to the states. And now it's up to all the people to, battle this. And most likely what you'd end up with is it being illegal in some places and not legal in others. And so people could get on a plane and fly somewhere and have an abortion. So, I mean, that's a long-term battle, But I do think for the first time we have justices who believe that they really should constrain themselves to the Constitution and not to whatever social things are going on. So I think you're going to see movement back. It'll probably start with things that regulate and then move beyond that. And then eventually when things weaken enough, then eventually those kinds of precedents collapse. But it takes a while.